Question 1. Stakeholder feedback indicates a concern regarding a licensed driver in Western Australia, WA, who may be experiencing a medical condition that could impair their ability to drive safely. The individual has not been formally diagnosed or assessed by a medical professional regarding their fitness to drive. What is the most appropriate course of action for a concerned party in Western Australia? Option A. Advise the driver to voluntarily surrender their license to the WA Department of Transport without providing any specific details of the concern. Option B. Directly inform the driver that they must stop driving immediately and confiscate their vehicle keys until they can prove they are fit to drive. Option C. Ignore the situation to avoid potential conflict and maintain a good relationship with the individual. Option D. Report the observed concerns and any supporting factual information to the WA Department of Transport, providing details of the driver's license if known. The correct answer is D. Report the observed concerns and any supporting factual information to the WA Department of Transport, providing details of the driver's license if known. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need to address a potential safety hazard with the ethical obligation to act within the bounds of the law and established procedures. A driver's license is a privilege granted by the Western Australian WA Department of Transport, and its suspension or cancellation is governed by strict legislative frameworks. Improperly handling a situation where a driver's fitness to drive is questioned can lead to legal repercussions for the reporting party and undermine the integrity of the licensing system. The best approach involves a structured, evidence-based process that respects due process and regulatory requirements. This means gathering objective information and reporting it through the designated channels to the relevant WA authority, the Department of Transport. This approach is correct because it adheres to the principles of natural justice and the specific provisions of the Road Traffic Administration Act 1978, WA, and associated regulations, which outline the grounds and procedures for license suspension or cancellation. It ensures that any action taken is based on credible information and is handled by the authority empowered to make such decisions, thereby upholding the rule of law and protecting the public interest without overstepping professional boundaries. An incorrect approach would be to directly intervene and prevent the individual from driving without proper authority. This bypasses the legal framework for assessing fitness to drive and could expose the intervener to liability for unlawful restraint or interference. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the concern due to a desire to avoid conflict. This fails to uphold the professional responsibility to report potential safety risks that could endanger the public, contravening the spirit of road safety legislation in WA. Finally, attempting to informally counsel the individual into surrendering their license without involving the official channels is insufficient and does not guarantee that the individual will cease driving or that the underlying issue is formally addressed by the licensing authority. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal and regulatory frameworks. This involves 1. Identifying the potential risk and its severity. 2. Consulting relevant legislation and organizational policies. 3. Gathering objective, factual information. 4. Reporting the information through the appropriate official channels to the empowered authority. 5. Avoiding any actions that constitute overreach or bypass established legal procedures. Question 2. During a practical driving assessment in Western Australia, an applicant becomes visibly distressed and anxious, exhibiting jerky movements and hesitating at intersections, which are not typical of their pre-test demeanor. As the examiner, you are aware of the applicant's significant effort and desire to pass this test. What is the most appropriate course of action to uphold the integrity of the Western Australian driver licensing process? Option A. Offer the applicant a brief break to compose themselves, and if they are still significantly distressed, proceed with a less rigorous assessment to accommodate their emotional state. Option B. Pass the applicant, acknowledging their distress and effort, with a note to the licensing authority about their anxiety, assuming their underlying driving skills are sufficient. Option C. Immediately terminate the test and advise the applicant to reschedule, stating that their current emotional state makes a fair assessment impossible. Option D. Continue the assessment, managing the applicant's anxiety where possible through calm instruction, and objectively evaluate their driving against the WA Driver's Handbook standards, making a decision based on their demonstrated performance. Correct answer is D. Continue the assessment, managing the applicant's anxiety where possible through calm instruction, and objectively evaluate their driving against the WA Driver's Handbook standards, making a decision based on their demonstrated performance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the legal and ethical obligations to ensure road safety. The applicant's distress and the examiner's desire to be helpful must not override the stringent requirements of the Western Australia WA driver licensing framework. The core ethical dilemma lies in deciding whether to compromise on the assessment process to accommodate the applicant's emotional state, potentially jeopardizing public safety, or to adhere strictly to the assessment criteria, which may cause further distress to the applicant. The best approach involves a compassionate yet firm adherence to the WA Driver's Handbook and the Road Traffic, Licensing and Control Regulations 1996. This means acknowledging the applicant's distress, offering appropriate support within the bounds of the testing procedure, and conducting the assessment fairly and objectively based on demonstrated driving competency. The WA framework prioritizes public safety by ensuring that only individuals who meet the required standards of skill and knowledge are granted a license. Therefore, a thorough assessment, even if it means the applicant may not pass on this occasion, is the only ethically and legally sound course of action. This approach upholds the integrity of the licensing system and protects other road users. An incorrect approach would be to overlook or downplay the applicant's evident nervousness and its impact on their driving performance. While empathy is important, allowing nervousness to significantly impair driving ability without a proper assessment of underlying skill is a failure to meet the licensing standards. This could lead to a license being issued to someone not yet safe to drive independently, contravening the spirit and letter of WA road safety legislation. Another incorrect approach would be to prematurely terminate the test solely due to the applicant's emotional state, without first attempting to manage the situation or assess if the nervousness is preventing a fair evaluation of their driving skills. While a test can be terminated if the applicant is unable to safely operate the vehicle, doing so without attempting to de-escalate or assess the impact of nervousness on actual driving ability is not in line with a professional and thorough assessment process. It fails to provide a clear indication of the applicant's capabilities under reasonable stress. A further incorrect approach would be to pass the applicant despite clear indications that their nervousness is significantly affecting their ability to control the vehicle safely, perhaps by making minor errors that, while understandable due to stress, still demonstrate a lack of consistent safe driving practice. This would be a direct contravention of the WA Driver's Handbook requirements for demonstrating safe and competent driving, prioritizing the applicant's immediate emotional relief over the safety of the public. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with understanding the regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. This involves recognizing the applicant's state, assessing its impact on their ability to demonstrate safe driving, and then making a judgment based on objective criteria outlined in the WA Driver's Handbook and relevant regulations. If the applicant's condition prevents a fair assessment, the professional should attempt to manage the situation, and if that fails, clearly explain the reasons for the test's outcome, offering guidance on next steps, such as rescheduling after further practice. Question 3. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of applicant anxiety impacting performance during a Western Australia WA driver's license test. You are the assessing officer. The applicant, visibly nervous, makes a minor hesitation at a junction, but demonstrates excellent hazard perception and vehicle control throughout the rest of the assessment. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Provide immediate verbal guidance and reassurance to the applicant during the test to help them overcome their nervousness and improve their performance. Option B. Assess the applicant's overall driving performance against the WA Driver's Handbook criteria, considering the minor hesitation in the context of their demonstrated competence in other areas. Option C. Fail the applicant based on the hesitation at the junction, as any deviation from perfect execution constitutes a failure. Option D. Pass the applicant regardless of their performance, prioritizing their emotional well-being over strict adherence to testing standards. The correct answer is B. Assess the applicant's overall driving performance against the WA Driver's Handbook criteria, considering the minor hesitation in the context of their demonstrated competence in other areas. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the legal and ethical obligations to ensure road safety. The applicant's eagerness and potential for minor errors, coupled with the examiner's responsibility to uphold the standards set by the Western Australia WA Department of Transport, necessitates careful judgment. The best approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the applicant's driving skills against the WA Driver's Handbook and relevant legislation. This means meticulously observing all aspects of the driving task, including adherence to road rules, vehicle control, hazard perception, and offensive driving techniques. If the applicant demonstrates competence in all critical areas, even with minor, non-safety impacting errors, they should be deemed to have met the standard. This aligns with the WA Department of Transport's mandate to license safe drivers, not to create an insurmountable barrier. The ethical obligation is to be fair and impartial, applying the same standards to all applicants. An approach that focuses solely on the applicant's anxiety and attempts to coach them through the test is professionally unacceptable. This deviates from the objective assessment required and could lead to the licensing of an inadequately prepared driver, compromising road safety. It also undermines the integrity of the testing process. Another unacceptable approach is to fail the applicant based on a single, minor error that does not pose a significant risk to road safety. While adherence to rules is crucial, the WA Driver's Handbook and the principles of safe driving recognize that minor, correctable mistakes can occur. Overly strict interpretation without considering the context of overall safety is not in line with the spirit of the licensing process. Finally, passing the applicant despite clear evidence of unsafe driving practices, simply to alleviate their stress or because the examiner feels sympathetic, is a grave ethical and regulatory failure. This directly contravenes the primary objective of the driver licensing system, which is to protect the public by ensuring only competent and safe drivers are licensed. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective assessment against established criteria, considers the context of each driving maneuver, and maintains impartiality. This involves understanding the WA Driver's Handbook thoroughly, focusing on critical safety aspects, and making decisions based on evidence of competence rather than personal feelings or external pressures. Question 4. Market research demonstrates that individuals often seek information about their driving history. A driver approaches a WA Department of Transport employee and asks for details about a specific traffic infringement allegedly committed by another driver, claiming it is impacting their own insurance premium. The employee has access to the relevant database. Option A. Inform the driver that the requested information is confidential and cannot be disclosed due to privacy legislation, but offer to guide them on the formal process for requesting their own driving record if they believe it contains errors. Option B. Tell the driver that you cannot help them and that they should speak to their insurance company directly without offering any further assistance or explanation. Option C. Provide the driver with the details of the other driver's infringement, explaining that it is a minor matter and will help resolve their insurance issue. Option D. Access the other driver's record and discreetly share the infringement details with the driver, stating that you are doing so as a favor to help them with their insurance. The correct answer is A. Inform the driver that the requested information is confidential and cannot be disclosed due to privacy legislation, but offer to guide them on the formal process for requesting their own driving record if they believe it contains errors. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the ethical obligation to protect sensitive personal data and adhere to privacy regulations. The driver's request, while seemingly straightforward, touches upon information that is not publicly accessible and is protected under Western Australian WA privacy laws. Careful judgment is required to avoid breaching privacy or misusing information. The best professional approach involves acknowledging the driver's request and explaining the limitations of what information can be disclosed due to privacy legislation. This approach upholds the principle of data protection by not releasing personal details without proper authorization or a legitimate legal basis. Specifically, under WA's Freedom of Information Act 1992 and general privacy principles, personal information held by government agencies is protected. The correct response would be to inform the driver that their specific driving history, including details of past infringements, is confidential and can only be accessed by the individual themselves through a formal application process or by authorized personnel for specific, legally defined purposes. This aligns with the ethical duty to respect privacy and the legal framework governing information access. An incorrect approach would be to provide the driver with information about another individual's driving record, even if it appears to be a minor infringement. This constitutes a serious breach of privacy and is a violation of WA's privacy principles and potentially the Freedom of Information Act 1992. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the driver's request without providing any explanation or guidance on how they might legitimately access relevant information. This demonstrates a lack of professional courtesy and fails to assist the individual within the bounds of the law. Finally, attempting to access or disclose information that is not within one's authorized scope of duties, even with good intentions, is a breach of professional conduct and could lead to disciplinary action and legal repercussions. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal and ethical standards. This involves first identifying the nature of the information requested and its sensitivity. Secondly, understanding the relevant legislation and organizational policies governing information disclosure is crucial. Thirdly, communicating clearly and respectfully with the individual, explaining the limitations and providing lawful alternatives is paramount. If unsure, seeking guidance from a supervisor or legal counsel is always the most responsible course of action. Question 5. System analysis indicates a driving test applicant in Western Australia becomes visibly distressed and tearful during their practical assessment, expressing significant anxiety about failing. As the examiner, you are aware of the applicant's personal circumstances which have contributed to this stress. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Proceed with the driving test as scheduled, conducting a full and objective assessment according to the Western Australian Driver's Handbook standards, while maintaining a professional and supportive demeanor. Option B. Shorten the driving test and overlook certain maneuvers to alleviate the applicant's stress and increase their chances of passing. Option C. Offer the applicant direct advice and coaching on how to perform specific maneuvers during the test to help them manage their anxiety and improve their performance. Option D. Immediately postpone the test indefinitely, advising the applicant to return when they feel completely calm and ready, without setting a specific future date. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the driving test as scheduled, conducting a full and objective assessment according to the Western Australian Driver's Handbook standards, while maintaining a professional and supportive demeanor. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the legal and ethical obligations to ensure road safety. The applicant's distress and the examiner's desire to be empathetic must not compromise the integrity of the licensing process, which is designed to protect all road users in Western Australia. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the applicant's driving ability against the Western Australian Driver's Handbook standards. This means proceeding with the test as scheduled, ensuring all required competencies are evaluated without undue pressure or leniency. This is correct because the Road Traffic, Licensing and Registration Act 1970, WA, and associated regulations mandate that all applicants demonstrate proficiency to a defined standard before being granted a license. The examiner's duty is to uphold these standards to ensure public safety, irrespective of the applicant's personal circumstances. Ethical considerations also dictate impartiality and fairness, meaning all applicants should be assessed on the same criteria. An incorrect approach would be to shorten the test or overlook certain maneuvers due to the applicant's emotional state. This is ethically and regulatorily flawed because it fails to adequately assess the applicant's ability to handle all driving situations safely, potentially putting other road users at risk. It also violates the principle of equal treatment for all applicants. Another incorrect approach would be to postpone the test indefinitely without a clear, objective reason related to the applicant's immediate ability to undertake the assessment. While empathy is important, the licensing process has established procedures. An indefinite postponement without cause can be seen as an arbitrary denial of the applicant's right to be assessed, while also not addressing the immediate safety concern of an unlicensed driver. A further incorrect approach would be to offer advice or coaching during the test. This compromises the objectivity of the assessment. The examiner's role is to evaluate, not to teach, during the practical driving test. Providing assistance would invalidate the test results and undermine the credibility of the licensing system. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and public safety. This involves 1. Understanding the specific requirements of the relevant legislation, in this case, Western Australian road traffic laws. 2. Objectively assessing the situation against these requirements. 3. Maintaining professional impartiality and ethical conduct. 4. Following established procedures for assessment and decision-making. 5. Documenting all decisions and actions clearly. Question 6. System analysis indicates that a licensing officer in Western Australia is conducting a practical driving test for an applicant who is visibly anxious and repeatedly expresses how crucial it is for them to pass today due to a new job opportunity. During the test, the applicant makes a minor error regarding correct speed selection on a residential street, but otherwise demonstrates good control and awareness. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing officer? Option A. Pass the applicant, acknowledging their anxiety and the importance of the job, and noting that the minor speed error is unlikely to pose a significant risk. Option B. Conduct the test strictly according to the WA Driver's Handbook and assessment criteria, objectively evaluating all demonstrated competencies and making a decision based solely on the applicant's performance against these standards. Option C. Extend the test duration to provide additional instruction on speed management and other areas where the applicant might be less confident, to help them demonstrate better performance. Option D. Fail the applicant immediately due to the speed error, explaining that any deviation from the prescribed speed limits, however minor, indicates a lack of adherence to road rules. Correct answer is B. Conduct the test strictly according to the WA Driver's Handbook and assessment criteria, objectively evaluating all demonstrated competencies and making a decision based solely on the applicant's performance against these standards. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the legal and safety requirements mandated by the Western Australian WA Department of Transport. The applicant's eagerness to obtain their license, coupled with their potential lack of full understanding of the road rules, creates a situation where a licensing officer must uphold the integrity of the licensing process without being unduly influenced by external pressures. The core ethical and regulatory imperative is to ensure that only individuals who have demonstrated competence and understanding of road safety are granted a license, thereby protecting all road users in WA. The best approach involves strictly adhering to the established WA Driver's Handbook and the assessment criteria for the practical driving test. This means conducting the test exactly as prescribed, observing the applicant's performance against all required competencies, and making a fair and objective decision based solely on their demonstrated driving ability and knowledge of road rules. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the WA Department of Transport's mandate to ensure road safety by licensing only competent drivers. It upholds the regulatory framework designed to prevent accidents and protect the public. An incorrect approach would be to overlook minor errors or to allow the applicant's personal circumstances or stated intentions to influence the assessment. For instance, if the licensing officer were to pass the applicant despite them demonstrating a lack of understanding of a critical road rule, such as correct lane usage at an intersection, this would be a failure to uphold the WA road rules and the safety standards. This action would be ethically questionable, as it prioritizes the applicant's immediate desire over public safety and regulatory compliance. Another incorrect approach would be to extend the test beyond its defined parameters to coach the applicant during the assessment. This deviates from the objective assessment process and compromises the integrity of the practical driving test as a measure of pre-existing competence. It also fails to adhere to the prescribed testing procedures. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective assessment against established criteria. This involves a clear understanding of the WA Driver's Handbook and the practical driving test syllabus, maintaining impartiality, and making decisions based solely on observed performance and adherence to road rules. When faced with a situation where an applicant is eager or expresses a strong need for the license, the professional should remind themselves of their duty to public safety and the legal requirements of the licensing process. If unsure about a specific aspect of the applicant's performance, They should consult the official assessment guidelines or a supervisor, rather than making subjective judgments. Question 7. System analysis indicates that during a Western Australian WA driver's license test, an examiner observes the driver failing to perform a thorough blind spot check for changing lanes. The driver does not appear to cause an immediate danger to other road users, but the maneuver is not executed according to safe driving practices. What is the most appropriate course of action for the examiner? Option A. Record the blind spot check failure as a minor point, but focus the final assessment on other, more significant driving errors that may occur later in the test. Option B. Overlook the blind spot check as it did not result in an immediate hazard, assuming it was a minor lapse in concentration. Option C. Document the failure to perform a blind spot check as a critical observation that may impact the overall assessment of the driver's competency. Option D. Verbally reprimand the driver for the oversight during the test, and then continue the assessment without further specific notation of this incident. The correct answer is C. Document the failure to perform a blind spot check as a critical observation that may impact the overall assessment of the driver's competency. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a driver's desire to complete their test efficiently and the paramount importance of road safety and adherence to Western Australian WA road rules. The examiner must exercise sound judgment, balancing the need to assess competence with the responsibility to ensure public safety. The temptation to overlook minor infractions for the sake of expediency or to avoid confrontation is a significant ethical consideration. The correct approach involves the examiner meticulously observing the driver's actions throughout the entire test, applying the WA Road Traffic, Licensing and Registration Regulations 1996 and the Driver and Vehicle Services DVS WA testing criteria consistently. This includes noting any deviation from safe driving practices or contravention of traffic laws, regardless of how minor it may seem. The examiner's duty is to assess the driver's ability to operate a vehicle safely and legally in WA conditions. Any instance where the driver fails to meet the required standard, such as failing to check blind spots adequately before changing lanes, constitutes a failure to demonstrate competency and poses a risk to road users. Therefore, the examiner must record this observation and consider its impact on the overall assessment, even if the driver otherwise performs well. This aligns with the ethical obligation to uphold public safety and the regulatory requirement to assess driving proficiency against established standards. An incorrect approach would be to overlook the driver's failure to check their blind spot before changing lanes, assuming it was a minor oversight that did not directly cause an immediate hazard. This fails to adhere to the WA DVS testing criteria, which explicitly require drivers to demonstrate safe lane-changing procedures, including blind spot checks. Ethically, this approach compromises public safety by potentially allowing an inadequately skilled driver onto the road. Another incorrect approach would be to allow the driver to continue the test without comment and then fail them at the end for a completely unrelated reason, such as a minor parking error. This is professionally unsound, as it does not provide the driver with specific, actionable feedback on their actual performance during the test, particularly regarding the critical lane-changing maneuver. It also deviates from the principle of fair and transparent assessment. A further incorrect approach would be to verbally admonish the driver during the test for the blind spot omission, and then continue the test as if nothing significant had occurred, without properly documenting the observation. This can create an intimidating environment for the driver, potentially affecting their subsequent performance, and it fails to follow the established WA DVS procedures for recording test observations and outcomes. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to regulations and ethical principles. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing the specific requirements of the WA Road Traffic, Licensing and Registration Regulations 1996 and DVS testing criteria. 2. Maintaining objective observation throughout the entire assessment. 3. Documenting all observed behaviors, both positive and negative, against the established standards. 4. Making a final assessment based on the cumulative evidence of the driver's performance, ensuring that safety and compliance are the primary considerations. Question 8. The monitoring system demonstrates a momentary lapse in your attention while driving in Western Australia, which did not result in any deviation from your lane, speed, or traffic signals. What is the most appropriate professional response? Option A. Acknowledge the alert from the monitoring system and critically assess its impact on actual driving safety, concluding that no further action is required if the lapse was inconsequential. Option B. Ignore the alert from the monitoring system, as it did not lead to any observable unsafe driving behavior. Option C. Immediately report the alert to the relevant traffic authority in Western Australia, assuming it signifies a breach of road rules. Option D. Self-report to the police for a lapse in attention, regardless of its impact on road safety. The correct answer is A. Acknowledge the alert from the monitoring system and critically assess its impact on actual driving safety, concluding that no further action is required if the lapse was inconsequential. Explanation: the monitoring system demonstrates a potential ethical dilemma for a driver in Western Australia. When it flags a minor, momentary lapse in attention that does not demonstrably impact safe driving. The professional challenge lies in balancing the obligation to adhere to road rules and maintain focus with the reality of human fallibility, and the potential for technology to misinterpret or over-penalize minor deviations. Overly strict adherence to every single alert, regardless of its impact on safety, could lead to unnecessary stress and potentially unwarranted consequences, while ignoring genuine safety concerns would be a dereliction of duty. Careful judgment is required to discern between a fleeting, inconsequential lapse and a pattern of inattention that compromises road safety. The best professional approach involves acknowledging the alert from the monitoring system, but critically evaluating its significance in the context of actual driving behavior. This means recognizing that the system has flagged an event, but then assessing whether that event constituted a genuine risk to road safety. If the lapse was momentary, did not lead to any deviation from the lane, speed, or traffic signals, and was immediately corrected, it is unlikely to warrant further action beyond a personal reflection on maintaining focus. This approach aligns with the WA road rules, which focus on driving in a manner that is safe and does not endanger oneself or others. It also reflects an ethical understanding that technology should be used as a tool to enhance safety, not as an instrument for absolute, unthinking enforcement of every minor deviation. An incorrect approach would be to immediately report the alert to the relevant authorities or to assume guilt and self-report for a minor, unimpactful lapse. This fails to exercise professional judgment and presumes the system's alert is definitive proof of a safety breach, which it may not be. It also bypasses the opportunity for self-reflection and learning. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the alert entirely without any assessment of its potential implications. While the lapse may have been minor, a pattern of ignoring such alerts could indicate a developing issue with driver attention that needs addressing. This approach risks overlooking genuine safety concerns. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that involves 1. Acknowledging the data provided by the monitoring system. 2. Critically assessing the context and impact of the flagged event on actual driving safety, considering WA road rules and the principle of not endangering others. 3. Taking appropriate action based on this assessment, which may range from personal reflection to reporting if a genuine safety risk is identified. 4. Continuously learning and adapting driving habits to maintain a high standard of road safety. Question 9. During the evaluation of a practical driving test in Western Australia, the examiner notices that the applicant, who is clearly nervous, has forgotten to bring their learner's permit. The applicant pleads with the examiner, stating they have practiced extensively with a family member and are confident they can drive safely, asking if they can proceed with the test with the examiner present, as they desperately need to pass. What is the most appropriate course of action for the examiner? Option A. Politely decline the request, explain that a valid learner's permit is a legal requirement to undertake the practical driving test in Western Australia, and reschedule the test for when the applicant can present the necessary documentation. Option B. Allow the applicant to proceed with the test, with the understanding that the examiner's presence will ensure safety, and then advise them to obtain their learner's permit immediately after. Option C. Immediately terminate the test and report the applicant to the relevant authorities for attempting to undertake a driving test without a valid learner's permit. Option D. Agree to the request out of sympathy for the applicant's nervousness and their stated need to pass, believing the examiner's supervision will mitigate any risks. The correct answer is A. Politely decline the request Explain that a valid learner's permit is a legal requirement to undertake the practical driving test in Western Australia, and reschedule the test for when the applicant can present the necessary documentation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need to assist a distressed individual with the fundamental responsibility to adhere to road safety regulations and the legal requirements for obtaining a driver's license in Western Australia. The examiner must make a judgment call that prioritizes public safety and the integrity of the licensing process, while also demonstrating empathy. The best approach involves prioritizing the safety of all road users and the integrity of the Western Australian driver's licensing process. This means the examiner must maintain their professional role and responsibilities, which include assessing the applicant's ability to drive safely and legally. Allowing an unlicensed individual to drive, even with supervision, contravenes the Road Traffic Administration Act 1975, WA, and associated regulations that mandate proper licensing for all drivers. The examiner's duty is to the public to ensure only competent and legally permitted individuals operate vehicles. Therefore, politely but firmly declining the request and explaining the legal necessity of a learner's permit or provisional license is the correct course of action. This upholds the law and the examiner's professional integrity. An approach that involves allowing the applicant to drive without a learner's permit, even with the examiner present, is a direct violation of Western Australian road traffic laws. This action would compromise the safety of the public by permitting an unlicensed driver on the road and undermines the entire licensing system. It also places the examiner in a position of liability. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately terminate the test and report the applicant without offering any explanation or guidance. While reporting is necessary if the applicant insists on driving illegally, a more professional and ethical response would involve first attempting to educate the applicant on the legal requirements and the reasons for the refusal. This demonstrates a commitment to fostering responsible driving behavior. A further inappropriate response would be to agree to the request out of sympathy, believing that the examiner's presence negates the risk. This is a misjudgment of the legal and safety implications. The examiner's presence does not confer legal driving privileges on an unlicensed individual, and the potential for unforeseen circumstances on the road remains. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety. This involves 1. Identifying the core conflict, personal sympathy versus legal obligation and safety. 2. Recalling relevant regulations, understanding the specific requirements for learners' permits and provisional licenses in Western Australia. 3. Assessing risk, evaluating the potential dangers of allowing an unlicensed individual to drive. 4. Communicating clearly and professionally, explaining the legal and safety reasons for the decision. 5. Acting ethically and legally, adhering to the established rules and procedures. Question 10. During a practical driving assessment in Western Australia, a candidate makes several minor driving errors. The assessor meticulously records each infraction according to the WA Driver's Handbook. The recorded penalty points are as follows. Lane positioning error, 3 points failure to signal a turn, 5 points speeding slightly, 5 km/h over limit in a 60 km/h zone, 7 points incomplete observation before changing lanes, 4 points hesitation at an intersection, 2 points if the maximum allowable penalty points for a learner driver to pass the assessment in Western Australia is 15 points. What is the total number of penalty points incurred by the candidate, and what should be the outcome of the assessment? Option A. The candidate incurs a total of 15 penalty points and therefore passes the assessment. Option B. The candidate incurs a total of 16 penalty points and therefore fails the assessment. Option C. The candidate incurs a total of 21 penalty points, but should be passed due to the minor nature of the errors. Option D. The candidate incurs a total of 21 penalty points and therefore fails the assessment. Correct answer is D. The candidate incurs a total of 21 penalty points and therefore fails the assessment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the legal and ethical obligations to ensure road safety. The core conflict lies between a candidate's perceived readiness and the objective, data-driven assessment mandated by the Western Australian WA licensing framework. Careful judgment is required to avoid compromising safety standards for expediency. The correct approach involves a rigorous, data-driven assessment of the candidate's driving performance against the established WA Driver's Handbook standards. This means meticulously recording all observed driving behaviors, including any deviations from safe driving practices, and calculating the total penalty points incurred. If the total penalty points exceed the maximum allowable threshold for a learner or provisional license, the candidate must be deemed to have failed the test. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the WA Department of Transport's licensing regulations, which are designed to ensure that only competent and safe drivers are granted licenses. The penalty point system is a quantifiable measure of driving proficiency and adherence to road rules, providing an objective basis for the assessment outcome. Ethically, this upholds the duty of care to the public by preventing potentially unsafe drivers from operating vehicles. An incorrect approach would be to overlook minor errors or to subjectively round down the penalty points to allow the candidate to pass, especially if the candidate expresses urgency or offers a plausible but unverified reason for their mistakes. This is ethically unacceptable, as it undermines the integrity of the licensing process and potentially places other road users at risk. It also violates the WA Driver's Handbook regulations by not applying the penalty point system as prescribed. Another incorrect approach would be to fail the candidate based on a single, isolated, and minor infraction that does not warrant a significant penalty point deduction, according to the WA Driver's Handbook, particularly if the rest of the candidate's performance was otherwise satisfactory. This would be an unfair and disproportionate assessment, failing to reflect the overall driving competency demonstrated. It deviates from the principle of a holistic assessment based on the accumulation of errors. A further incorrect approach would be to pass the candidate despite a clear pattern of unsafe driving behaviors that, when summed, clearly exceed the allowable penalty points, based on a personal feeling that the candidate will learn or is generally a good person. This is a failure of professional responsibility and a direct contravention of the WA licensing regulations. It prioritizes subjective impressions over objective evidence and established safety standards. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to objective assessment, strict adherence to regulatory guidelines, and a clear understanding of the ethical responsibilities inherent in the role. Professionals must rely on the established criteria and data, such as the penalty point system outlined in the WA Driver's Handbook, to make licensing decisions. If a candidate's performance falls below the required standard, the decision to fail must be based on that objective evidence, regardless of external pressures or personal feelings. This ensures fairness, consistency, and most importantly, public safety. Question 11. System analysis indicates a driver in Western Australia observes a person appearing distressed and waving for help on the side of busy road. The driver is approaching a section of the road with limited visibility and heavy traffic. What is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action? Option A. Stop the vehicle abruptly on the shoulder of the road, even if it is a dangerous location like a blind curve, to offer immediate assistance. Option B. Immediately stop the vehicle in the traffic lane to ascertain the nature of the distress. Option C. Continue driving without stopping, assuming the person will find other assistance. Option D. Safely pull over to the side of the road in a location that does not impede traffic or create a hazard, then assess the situation and contact emergency services if necessary. The correct answer is D. Safely pull over to the side of the road in a location that does not impede traffic or create a hazard, then assess the situation and contact emergency services if necessary. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the immediate need to assist a distressed individual against the legal and ethical obligations of a driver to follow road rules and ensure safety. The driver must balance empathy with responsibility, recognizing that their actions, however well-intentioned, must not compromise public safety or violate Western Australian road traffic laws. The best approach involves prioritizing immediate safety and legal compliance while seeking appropriate assistance. This means stopping the vehicle safely, away from traffic, and then assessing the situation to determine the best course of action. This aligns with the principles of responsible driving and the legal requirements under the Road Traffic Act 1974, WA, and associated regulations, which mandate drivers to act with due care and attention, and to render assistance when reasonably possible without creating further danger. The ethical imperative to help someone in distress is met by taking steps that are safe and lawful, such as contacting emergency services. An incorrect approach would be to stop abruptly in a traffic lane. This directly violates the Road Traffic Act 1974, WA, by creating a hazard for other road users, potentially leading to an accident. It demonstrates a failure to exercise due care and attention, and a disregard for the safety of others on the road. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the distressed person and continue driving. This avoids creating a hazard. It fails to meet the ethical expectation of a responsible citizen to offer assistance when it can be done safely and reasonably. The Road Traffic Act 1974, WA, does not explicitly mandate stopping for every distressed person, but the spirit of responsible driving and community welfare encourages such actions when feasible. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to stop the vehicle in a dangerous location, such as on a blind corner or in the middle of an intersection, to offer direct assistance. This prioritizes the immediate act of helping over the paramount duty to ensure road safety, thereby creating a significant risk of a serious accident and contravening fundamental road traffic laws in Western Australia. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that first assesses the immediate safety of the situation for themselves and other road users. This involves considering the location, traffic conditions, and potential hazards. Next, they should evaluate their legal obligations under the Road Traffic Act 1974, WA. Finally, they should consider the ethical implications of their actions, aiming to balance the desire to help with the responsibility to maintain public safety and adhere to the law. Question 12. The control framework reveals that Mr. Davies, a learner driver in Western Australia, is practicing for his driver's license test with his father supervising. During the practice session, his father becomes engrossed in a lengthy personal phone call, leaving Mr. Davies to navigate traffic with minimal direct supervision. What is the most responsible and ethically sound course of action for Mr. Davies to take in this situation? Option A. Pull over to the side of the road and wait for his father to complete his phone call before resuming driving. Option B. Politely ask his father to end the phone call and focus on supervising his driving. Option C. Continue driving without saying anything, hoping his father will finish the call soon. Option D. Become flustered, make a driving error, and then stop the car to express frustration to his father. The correct answer is B. Politely ask his father to end the phone call and focus on supervising his driving. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where a learner driver, Mr. Davies, is practicing for his Western Australia WA driver's license test. He is accompanied by his father, who is supervising but appears to be distracted by a personal phone call. The situation presents a significant professional challenge because the supervisor's primary responsibility is to ensure the safety of the learner driver, other road users, and themselves, as mandated by the Road Traffic Administration, Act 1975, WA, and associated regulations governing learner permits. The supervisor's distraction directly compromises the learner's ability to receive effective guidance and potentially react to unforeseen road hazards, thereby increasing the risk of an accident. Careful judgment is required to balance the learner's practice needs with the paramount importance of road safety and adherence to licensing conditions. The best approach involves the learner driver immediately and politely requesting their supervisor to end the phone call and focus on the driving task. This is correct because it directly addresses the immediate safety concern by ensuring the supervisor is attentive and capable of providing necessary guidance and intervention. The Road Traffic Administration, Act 1975, WA, and the conditions of a learner's permit implicitly require the supervising driver to be in a fit and proper state to supervise, which includes being attentive to the road and the learner. Ethically, the learner driver has a responsibility to ensure their own safety and the safety of others, and proactively addressing a compromised supervision situation aligns with this duty. An incorrect approach would be for the learner driver to continue driving without comment, hoping the supervisor will end the call on their own. This is professionally unacceptable as it passively accepts a compromised safety situation, potentially leading to an incident. It fails to uphold the learner's responsibility to ensure safe driving practices and places undue reliance on the supervisor's unsolicited correction. Another incorrect approach would be for the learner driver to become flustered and make a driving error due to the supervisor's distraction, then immediately stop the car and express anger towards the supervisor. While frustration is understandable, this reaction escalates the situation unnecessarily and does not proactively address the root cause of the potential danger. It prioritizes emotional response over a calm, constructive resolution, and could lead to a breakdown in communication, hindering future learning. A final incorrect approach would be for the learner-driver to pull over to the side of the road and wait for the supervisor to finish their call, then resume driving. While this removes the immediate risk of driving with a distracted supervisor, it is not the best approach because it unnecessarily halts the practice session and does not empower the learner to address the issue directly. It avoids the opportunity for the learner to practice assertive communication regarding safety concerns, which is a valuable skill. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and proactive communication. This involves 1. Identifying the immediate risk distracted supervisor. 2. Assessing the potential consequences accident license test failure. 3. Considering available options addressing the supervisor stopping ignoring. 4. Selecting the option that best mitigates risk and upholds responsibilities, politely requesting focus. 5. Executing the chosen option calmly and assertively. Question 13. In Western Australia, while conducting a practical driving assessment for a nervous applicant who is visibly distressed and mentions their family is waiting outside, what is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing examiner? Option A. Allow the applicant's family member to sit in the back seat of the vehicle during the practical test to provide moral support. Option B. Pass the applicant despite some minor errors, given their evident distress and the examiner's personal acquaintance with their family. Option C. Proceed with the assessment exactly as scheduled, adhering strictly to the Department of Transport's established procedures and assessment criteria, making a decision based solely on the applicant's performance. Option D. Modify the planned test route to include only familiar roads the applicant has driven on previously to reduce their anxiety. Correct answer is C. Proceed with the assessment exactly as scheduled, adhering strictly to the Department of Transport's established procedures and assessment criteria, making a decision based solely on the applicant's performance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the legal and ethical obligations to ensure road safety. The applicant's distress and the examiner's desire to be helpful must not compromise the integrity of the testing process or the safety of other road users in Western Australia. The correct approach involves strictly adhering to the Western Australian Department of Transport's DOT licensing procedures and assessment criteria. This means conducting the entire assessment as scheduled, without alteration, and making a decision based solely on the applicant's performance against the established standards. The Road Traffic Licensing and Registration Act 1970 WA, and associated regulations mandate that a license is only issued to individuals who demonstrate competence and adherence to road rules. Allowing a family member to observe or provide input during the practical test, or modifying the test route based on personal knowledge, violate these regulations by introducing external influences and potentially compromising the objective assessment of the applicant's driving skills. This approach upholds the principle of public safety, which is paramount in driver licensing. An incorrect approach would be to allow the applicant's family member to sit in the car during the practical driving assessment. This introduces an external, unqualified observer whose presence could distract the applicant, influence their behavior, or create an unsafe situation. It also deviates from the standardized assessment protocol designed to evaluate the applicant's independent driving ability, contravening the spirit and letter of the DOT's assessment guidelines. Another incorrect approach would be to alter the planned test route to include roads the applicant is more familiar with, or to shorten the test. This is unethical and illegal as it bypasses the requirement for a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's ability to navigate various traffic conditions and road types, as stipulated by the WA licensing framework. Such a deviation undermines the purpose of the test, which is to ensure all licensed drivers possess a minimum standard of competency across a range of driving scenarios. Further incorrect approach would be to pass the applicant based on the examiner's personal knowledge of the applicant or their family, or due to sympathy for their situation. Driver licensing decisions in Western Australia must be based on objective performance during the assessment, not on personal relationships or emotional considerations. This violates the principles of fairness, impartiality, and the regulatory requirement for a standardized, evidence-based evaluation. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and public safety. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the WA driver licensing legislation and DOT policies, maintaining strict impartiality, and making decisions solely on the observed performance against objective criteria. If an applicant is struggling, the correct procedure is to assess their performance honestly, and if they do not meet the required standard, to fail them and advise them on further practice and reassessment opportunities, rather than compromising the integrity of the licensing process. Question 14. System analysis indicates a driving test candidate in Western Australia appears visibly distressed and expresses significant anxiety about a particular maneuver, stating they just can't do it today. As the examiner, what is the most appropriate course of action to uphold the integrity of the Western Australian licensing process while remaining professional? Option A. Offer to allow the candidate to skip the difficult maneuver and proceed with the rest of the test, to avoid further upsetting them. Option B. Proceed with the test as scheduled, objectively assessing all required maneuvers according to the Western Australian Driver's Handbook, and if the candidate fails to demonstrate competence due to their distress, record the outcome accordingly. Option C. Postpone the test indefinitely until the candidate feels completely ready, without requiring them to formally reschedule through the official channels. Option D. Pass the candidate despite their expressed inability to perform a required maneuver, reasoning that their distress indicates they are not fit to drive, but a license would be better than them driving unlicensed. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the test as scheduled, objectively assessing all required maneuvers according to the Western Australian Driver's Handbook, and if the candidate fails to demonstrate competence due to their distress, record the outcome accordingly. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the legal and ethical obligations to ensure road safety. The applicant's distress and the examiner's desire to be helpful must not override the fundamental requirement of demonstrating competence and adherence to Western Australian road rules. The core conflict lies between empathy and regulatory compliance. The best approach involves a clear, firm, and objective assessment based strictly on the Western Australian Driver's Handbook and the Road Traffic Act 1974, WA. This means proceeding with the test as planned, ensuring all required maneuvers are performed to the standard outlined in the official testing criteria. If the applicant fails to demonstrate the necessary skills due to their emotional state or lack of preparation, the outcome must reflect that assessment. This approach is correct because it upholds the integrity of the licensing process, prioritizes public safety by ensuring only competent drivers are licensed, and adheres to the explicit requirements of the Western Australian Licensing Framework. The Road Traffic Act 1974, WA, mandates that applicants must demonstrate proficiency, and the Driver's Handbook provides the objective standards for this demonstration. An approach that involves allowing the applicant to skip a difficult maneuver or providing excessive verbal guidance beyond what is permitted during a standard assessment is incorrect. This would compromise the validity of the test, as it would not accurately reflect the applicant's ability to drive independently and safely. It violates the principle of fair and consistent assessment for all applicants and undermines the purpose of the licensing system, which is to protect road users. Furthermore, it could be seen as a breach of professional conduct by the examiner, potentially leading to disciplinary action. Another incorrect approach would be to postpone the test indefinitely without a clear, objective reason related to the testing environment or the applicant's immediate physical inability to perform the test, e.g., severe illness. While empathy is important, the licensing system has established procedures for rescheduling. Simply delaying the test due to the applicant's emotional state, without following the proper procedure for a failed or incomplete assessment, is not a professional solution and does not address the core issue of demonstrating driving competence. Finally, an approach that involves passing the applicant, despite clear evidence of them not meeting the required standards, based on a desire to avoid causing further distress, is ethically and legally indefensible. This directly contravenes the examiner's duty to assess competence and the state's interest in ensuring only qualified individuals operate vehicles on public roads. It creates a significant risk to public safety and erodes trust in the licensing authority. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established regulations and ethical principles. This involves 1. Objectively assessing the situation against the relevant legal and procedural requirements, in this case, the WA Driver's Handbook and Road Traffic Act 1974. 2. Maintaining professional impartiality and avoiding personal bias or emotional influence. 3. Communicating clearly and respectfully with the applicant about the process and expectations. And 4. Making decisions based on demonstrable evidence of competence or lack thereof, rather than subjective feelings or a desire to please. Question 15. Governance review demonstrates that a driver licensing examiner in Western Australia is conducting a practical driving test. The applicant, who is visibly distressed and struggling with some basic maneuvers, expresses significant anxiety about failing. The examiner feels sympathetic and is aware that the applicant has traveled a considerable distance for this test. What is the most appropriate course of action for the examiner to take? Option A. Inform the applicant that they are not meeting the required standard, but offer to pass them with a strong warning about their driving and a promise of future informal guidance. Option B. Suggest the applicant reschedule the test immediately and offer to provide some informal coaching before the rescheduled assessment to help them improve. Option C. Overlook minor errors in the applicant's performance due to their visible distress and the distance they have traveled to allow them to pass. Option D. Conduct the test according to the official WA Driver's Handbook assessment criteria, objectively evaluating the applicant's performance and making a decision based solely on that performance. The correct answer is D. Conduct the test according to the official WA Driver's Handbook assessment criteria, objectively evaluating the applicant's performance and making a decision based solely on that performance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the ethical obligation to ensure road safety and adherence to Western Australian WA licensing regulations. The applicant's distress and the examiner's desire to be helpful must not compromise the integrity of the testing process or the safety of other road users. Careful judgment is required to uphold the standards set by the Department of Transport in WA. The best professional approach involves strictly adhering to the WA Driver's Handbook and the assessment criteria for the practical driving test. This means conducting the test as scheduled, objectively assessing the applicant's performance against all required competencies, and making a decision based solely on that performance. If the applicant fails to meet the required standard, the examiner must inform them of the reasons for failure and advise on the next steps, which typically involve further practice and retesting. This approach is correct because it upholds the regulatory framework designed to ensure all licensed drivers possess the necessary skills and knowledge to operate a vehicle safely on WA roads. It aligns with the ethical duty of the examiner to protect public safety and maintain the credibility of the licensing system. An approach that involves overlooking minor errors due to the applicant's emotional state is professionally unacceptable. This would be a failure to apply the WA licensing standards consistently and objectively. It compromises the integrity of the test, potentially licensing an individual who is not yet safe to drive, thereby creating a risk to public safety. It also undermines the fairness of the process for other applicants who are assessed strictly on their performance. Another unacceptable approach would be to offer to pass the applicant with a promise of future guidance or a warning. This is a direct contravention of the licensing regulations and is unethical. The practical driving test is a pass/fail assessment based on demonstrated competency at the time of the test. Offering a conditional pass or a warning in lieu of a proper assessment is a serious breach of professional conduct and regulatory compliance. It misrepresents the applicant's driving ability and bypasses the established procedures for obtaining a license. Finally, suggesting the applicant reschedule the test immediately and offering to coach them before the rescheduled test is also professionally inappropriate. While rescheduling is a valid option if the applicant is genuinely unable to perform due to distress, offering to coach them before a retest blurs the line between examiner and instructor. This creates a conflict of interest and compromises the impartiality required of an examiner. The examiner's role is to assess, not to train or provide an advantage to a specific applicant. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing the specific regulations and assessment criteria of the relevant jurisdiction, WA Department of Transport. 2. Objectively assessing the situation and the applicant's performance against these criteria. 3. Communicating decisions clearly and professionally, explaining the rationale based on the regulations. 4. Maintaining impartiality and avoiding any actions that could be perceived as favoritism or a compromise of standards. 5. Knowing when to seek guidance from supervisors if a situation is particularly complex or presents an ethical quandary. Question 16. Strategic planning requires a driver in Western Australia to anticipate potential hazards on the road. If you are driving along a suburban street in Perth and observe a young child playing near the edge of the footpath, what is the most responsible course of action to ensure their safety and maintain road compliance? Option A. Continue at your current speed, assuming the child is aware of the traffic and will stay clear of the roadway. Option B. Significantly reduce your speed, observe the child's movements closely, and be prepared to stop if they appear to be moving towards the road. Option C. Maintain your current speed but be ready to swerve if the child suddenly enters the road. Option D. Sound your horn loudly to alert the child to your presence and encourage them to move away from the road. The correct answer is B. Significantly reduce your speed, observe the child's movements closely, and be prepared to stop if they appear to be moving towards the road. Explanation. Strategic planning requires careful consideration of ethical implications, especially when dealing with vulnerable road users. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the immediate need for efficient traffic flow against the safety and well-being of a child who may not fully understand road rules or dangers. The driver must exercise sound judgment, prioritizing safety over convenience, and adhering to Western Australia's road traffic laws. The best professional approach involves a proactive and cautious response that prioritizes the child's safety above all else. This means slowing down significantly, observing the child's behavior, and being prepared to stop if necessary to avoid any potential collision or hazard. This aligns with the fundamental ethical duty of care owed by all road users to protect others, particularly children, and is implicitly supported by Western Australian road rules that mandate drivers to exercise due care and attention, and to avoid collisions. The law expects drivers to anticipate potential hazards, and a child near a road is a clear indicator of such a hazard. An incorrect approach would be to assume the child is aware of the traffic and will move out of the way. This demonstrates a failure to exercise due care and attention, a core principle in Western Australian road safety legislation. It places an undue burden of responsibility on the child and ignores the driver's primary obligation to control their vehicle safely. Another incorrect approach is to honk the horn aggressively to alert the child. While intended to warn, aggressive honking can startle a child, potentially causing them to react unpredictably and move into the path of the vehicle. This action, while seemingly an attempt to alert, can inadvertently create a more dangerous situation and demonstrates a lack of considered judgment in managing the immediate hazard. Finally, continuing at the same speed and assuming the child will move is a direct contravention of the duty of care. It prioritizes the driver's convenience and schedule over the absolute imperative of road safety, particularly when a child is involved. This demonstrates a severe lapse in professional judgment and a disregard for the potential consequences, which could include serious injury or fatality, and significant legal repercussions under Western Australian law. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with hazard identification, followed by risk assessment, and then the implementation of appropriate control measures. In this case, the hazard is the child near the road. The risk is that the child might enter the roadway unexpectedly. The control measure is to reduce speed and prepare to stop, thereby mitigating the risk to an acceptable level. This systematic approach ensures that safety is always the paramount consideration. Question 17. The assessment process reveals that a learner driver who has been experiencing significant anxiety during practical driving lessons is scheduled for their Western Australia WA driver's license practical assessment. You, as the supervising instructor, are aware of the learner's heightened stress levels, which have previously led to minor errors, but you believe they have made substantial progress and are generally competent. What is the most ethically sound and professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Cancel the assessment unilaterally without further discussion with the learner, citing concerns about their anxiety. Option B. Proceed with the assessment as scheduled, assuring the learner that they will likely perform well despite their anxiety. Option C. Encourage the learner to push through their anxiety, emphasizing that the assessment is a necessary step and that they should try their best to ignore their stress. Option D. Discuss the learner's anxiety with them. Explore its potential impact on their performance and safety during the assessment, and collaboratively decide whether to proceed with the assessment or reschedule. The correct answer is D. Discuss the learner's anxiety with them, explore its potential impact on their performance and safety during the assessment, and collaboratively decide whether to proceed with the assessment or reschedule. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a situation where a learner driver, who has been experiencing significant anxiety during practical driving lessons, is scheduled for their Western Australia WA driver's license practical assessment. The supervising instructor is aware of the learner's heightened stress levels, which have previously led to minor errors, but believes the learner has made substantial progress and is generally competent. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the instructor's duty of care and professional judgment against the learner's desire to complete the assessment and the potential consequences of either proceeding or delaying. The instructor must balance the need to ensure road safety, uphold the integrity of the assessment process, and support the learner's well-being and progress. Careful judgment is required to determine the most responsible course of action. The best professional approach involves communicating openly with the learner about their current state and the implications for the assessment. This includes discussing the potential impact of anxiety on their performance and safety, and collaboratively deciding whether to proceed with the assessment or reschedule. This approach aligns with the ethical principles of client-centered practice and professional responsibility, ensuring the learner is an active participant in the decision-making process, and that the assessment is conducted under conditions most likely to yield a true reflection of their driving ability, without compromising safety. It also respects the WA Department of Transport's guidelines for driver licensing, which implicitly require assessments to be conducted when the applicant is in a suitable state to demonstrate their skills safely and effectively. Proceeding with the assessment without a frank discussion about the learner's anxiety and its potential impact is professionally unacceptable. This approach fails to uphold the duty of care to the learner and the public, as it risks an assessment being conducted under duress, potentially leading to an unsafe outcome or a false negative result. It also undermines the learner's autonomy by not involving them in a critical decision that directly affects them. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to unilaterally cancel the assessment without consulting the learner. While seemingly cautious, this action can be demoralizing for the learner, potentially exacerbating their anxiety and hindering their progress. It bypasses the opportunity for collaborative problem-solving and can create a sense of disempowerment. Finally, pressuring the learner to proceed despite their evident anxiety, with assurances that they will be fine, is also professionally unsound. This dismisses the learner's genuine concerns and places undue pressure on them, increasing the likelihood of errors due to stress rather than a lack of skill. It prioritizes the instructor's desire to complete the scheduled task over the learner's well-being and the integrity of the assessment process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes open communication, client well-being, and adherence to regulatory standards. This involves 1. Assessing the situation and identifying potential risks and ethical considerations. 2. Engaging in a transparent dialogue with the client to understand their perspective and concerns. 3. Collaboratively exploring options and their consequences. 4. Making a joint decision that best balances safety, ethical obligations, and client goals. And 5. Documenting the decision-making process and the rationale behind the chosen course of action. Question 18. Operational review demonstrates a driver in Western Australia observes a pedestrian on the side of a busy road appearing distressed and waving for assistance. The driver is approaching a section of the road with limited safe stopping locations. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Immediately stop the vehicle in the current lane of traffic to ascertain the pedestrian's needs, as the person appears to be in distress. Option B. Safely pull over to the side of the road at the first available safe location, away from traffic, and assess the situation before offering assistance or calling emergency services if necessary. Option C. Pull over as close as possible to the pedestrian, even if it means stopping partially in a traffic lane, to offer immediate help. Option D. Continue driving and assume the pedestrian will find other assistance, as stopping in a potentially unsafe location could create a hazard. The correct answer is B. Safely pull over to the side of the road at the first available safe location, away from traffic, and assess the situation before offering assistance or calling emergency services if necessary. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need to assist a distressed individual with the legal and ethical obligations of a driver. The driver is faced with a situation where their personal safety and adherence to traffic laws might conflict with their moral impulse to help. Careful judgment is required to navigate this conflict responsibly and legally. The best approach involves prioritizing safety and adherence to road rules while still offering assistance within legal boundaries. This means stopping the vehicle safely and legally, away from traffic, and then assessing the situation. If the individual appears to be in immediate danger or requires urgent medical attention, the driver should call emergency services 000 in Western Australia and provide assistance only if it is safe to do so and within the driver's capabilities. This aligns with the general ethical expectation to help others in need, but crucially, it respects the primary duty of a driver to operate their vehicle safely and to not endanger themselves or others. Western Australian road laws, such as those pertaining to safe stopping and the general duty of care on the road, support this measured response. Furthermore, the Road Traffic Administration, Act 1978, WA and associated regulations emphasize safe driving practices and the avoidance of creating hazards. An incorrect approach would be to stop abruptly in a traffic lane or in a manner that creates a hazard for other road users. This directly contravenes Western Australian road rules that mandate safe stopping procedures and prohibit actions that impede traffic flow or endanger others. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation entirely, which, while not directly violating a specific road rule, fails to meet the broader ethical expectation of responsible citizenship and could be seen as a dereliction of moral duty if the situation clearly warranted intervention. Finally, approaching the individual without first ensuring the safety of the stopping location or without considering the potential risks involved could lead to further complications or endanger the driver themselves, which is contrary to the principles of responsible driving and personal safety. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that first assesses the immediate safety of the situation for themselves and other road users. This is followed by an evaluation of the nature of the distress and the appropriate level of intervention, considering legal obligations and personal capabilities. When in doubt, contacting emergency services is always the safest and most responsible course of action. Question 19. Cost-benefit analysis shows that passing a learner driver who is struggling with a specific WA road rule during their practical driving assessment might save time and reduce applicant dissatisfaction. But what is the most ethically and regulatorily sound course of action for the WA Department of Transport examiner? Option A. End the test early and advise the applicant to reschedule, stating they are close to passing, to avoid further frustration. Option B. Conduct the assessment strictly according to the WA driver's handbook and testing protocols, objectively evaluating the applicant's performance and failing them if they demonstrate a lack of competence or understanding of critical road rules. Option C. Allow the applicant to practice the difficult maneuver a few more times during the test to help them pass, as the overall benefit of a new license holder outweighs the minor deviation. Option D. Pass the applicant with a warning about the specific rule, assuming they will learn it through experience on WA roads. The correct answer is B. Conduct the assessment strictly according to the WA driver's handbook and testing protocols, objectively evaluating the applicant's performance and failing them if they demonstrate a lack of competence or understanding of critical road rules. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the ethical obligation to ensure road safety and adherence to Western Australian WA road rules. The applicant's eagerness and the examiner's desire to complete the test efficiently must not compromise the integrity of the assessment process or public safety. Careful judgment is required to uphold the standards set by the WA Department of Transport. The best professional approach involves strictly adhering to the WA driver's handbook and the official testing procedures. This means conducting a thorough assessment of the applicant's ability to safely operate a vehicle and follow all road rules, regardless of external pressures or the applicant's perceived readiness. The examiner must remain objective, focusing solely on observable driving behavior and compliance with WA traffic laws. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the primary objective of driver licensing, to ensure that only competent and safe drivers are permitted on WA roads. It upholds the ethical duty of the examiner to protect the public and maintain the credibility of the licensing system. An incorrect approach would be to overlook minor errors or to help the applicant by subtly guiding them through difficult maneuvers. This is ethically unsound as it misrepresents the applicant's actual driving ability and compromises the safety of other road users. It also violates the WA Department of Transport's testing protocols, which mandate an objective evaluation. Another incorrect approach would be to prematurely end the test based on a subjective feeling that the applicant is almost there, or to pass them despite significant rule breaches because they seem to have a good attitude. This is professionally irresponsible and ethically negligent. It fails to adequately assess the applicant's understanding and application of critical WA road rules, potentially leading to dangerous driving behavior and an increased risk of accidents on WA roads. A further incorrect approach would be to allow the applicant to practice specific maneuvers repeatedly during the test itself, beyond what is permitted by the testing protocol. While the intention might be to help the applicant succeed, this deviates from the standard assessment and does not reflect how a driver would perform in a real-world driving situation without such allowances. It undermines the fairness and consistency of the testing process across all applicants in WA. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the WA Driver's Handbook and testing procedures, maintaining objectivity throughout the assessment, and making decisions based on observable evidence of safe driving and rule adherence. If an applicant demonstrates a lack of competence or understanding of WA road rules, the professional obligation is to fail them, providing clear and constructive feedback for future improvement, rather than compromising standards. Question 20. The performance metrics for driving instructors in Western Australia show that Instructor has a pass rate for their students that is 15% lower than the average pass rate for all instructors in the Perth metropolitan area over the last quarter. If the average pass rate is 72%, an instructor has trained 80 students in that period, what is the expected number of students Instructor would have passed if they had met the average pass rate, and what is the difference in the number of students passed? Option A. Instructor would have been expected to pass 68 students, resulting in a difference of 4 students not passed compared to the average. Option B. Instructor would have been expected to pass 6 students, resulting in a difference of 13 students not passed compared to the average. Option C. Instructor would have been expected to pass 68 students, resulting in a difference of 44 students not passed compared to the average. Option D. Instructor would have been expected to pass 6 students, resulting in a difference of 44 students not passed compared to the average. The correct answer is D. Instructor would have been expected to pass 6 students, resulting in a difference of 44 students not passed compared to the average. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between achieving performance targets and ensuring the safety and ethical conduct of driving instructors. The pressure to meet metrics can tempt individuals to overlook critical safety protocols or engage in misleading practices. Careful judgment is required to balance operational demands with the paramount responsibility of public safety and regulatory compliance. The best approach involves a transparent and data-driven analysis of the performance metrics, focusing on identifying the root causes of any discrepancies without resorting to punitive measures that could incentivize unsafe behavior. This includes a thorough review of the instructor's training records, student feedback, and the specific circumstances of the observed driving sessions. By engaging in a constructive dialogue with the instructor, understanding their challenges, and offering targeted support or retraining, the organization upholds its commitment to both professional development and road safety as mandated by the Western Australia WA Road Safety Strategy and the Department of Transport's approved Driving Instructor Code of Conduct. This approach prioritizes a holistic view of performance, acknowledging that metrics are indicators, not absolute judgments, and that support is key to improvement. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement a financial penalty based solely on the performance metrics without further investigation. This fails to acknowledge potential external factors influencing performance and could unfairly penalize an instructor. It also risks creating a culture of fear rather than one of continuous improvement, potentially leading instructors to hide issues rather than address them. This contravenes the spirit of the approved driving instructor code of conduct, which emphasizes fair treatment and professional development. Another incorrect approach is to focus exclusively on the number of passes or fails without considering the quality of instruction or adherence to WA's driver licensing standards. This metric-driven approach ignores the ethical obligation to ensure that all licensed drivers are competent and safe, not just those who can pass a test under specific conditions. It also disregards the importance of providing constructive feedback and support to instructors, which is a key component of maintaining high standards in driver education. A further incorrect approach would be to dismiss the performance metrics as irrelevant and ignore any potential issues. This demonstrates a lack of accountability and a failure to proactively manage risks. The Department of Transport expects approved driving instructors to maintain a high standard of instruction, and ignoring performance data that suggests otherwise is a dereliction of professional duty and a potential breach of the licensing agreement. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with objective data analysis, followed by a thorough investigation into the underlying causes of any performance deviations. This should involve open communication with the individuals involved, consideration of all relevant factors, including training, student demographics, and external influences, and the development of a supportive action plan focused on improvement and adherence to regulatory standards. The ultimate goal is to ensure both operational efficiency and the highest standards of road safety and ethical conduct.